I believe all these poems that we've looked at and listened to today are kind of anchored in certain things. So even though in some of the poems, the subject matter can be, it's not easy for us to grasp it at first glance, but all of them are anchored in something in the sense that, let's say, Nick's poem, there's this Banksy's work, and of course there are the quotes being used. Jenny's poem, of course, there's Wong Kar-wai's films, and even Collier's works, they are really kind of physically anchored. You have this pivot, and you have to kind of look at, even though you have the freedom to kind of, read the poem your way, it is still kind of anchored in that central point. And of course, for Tim Tim's work, there is this sculpture. So could I first kind of ask any of the guests, do you have any kind of comment on that? And we can actually perhaps quote and unquote use, it's actually Banksy's term, but Nick, you've used it in your first line. What's the kind of creative urge behind these works that we've looked at today to kind of give us a bit more food for thought? Would anyone want to start on this?
Creative urge.
The creative urge, or you've kind of talked. Oh, you kind of talked about that already. It's more about maybe the quote and the caption and all that. But yeah, maybe creative urge in general.
Okay, I to be honest, I don't care about Banksy's work. The background of the making, the history, anything. I wrote the poem that you read on the first page only because of the rhythm that I got in my head after I saw the painting itself. I didn't really stay in the room for more than 2 minutes. I lined up for like 20 minutes. I booked the session, 20 minutes, I went in. So it was a nice room, and then, yes, this is the work. And then, okay, done. But then I had this idea, this rhythm in my head. The urge to destroy is also a creative urge, sex, fantasy, holding. I think I let it out because there's a rhythm in that. And
we can really get this rhythm from the poem.
Thank you.
Just
not only because I keep saying the same thing.
But also the sounds of that, because I really get that Shredder's sound. And of course, it's the use of the word quoting. I really get that.
I like the K sound.
The rhythm and the K sound, basically. So
So the creative urge is basically that. Rather than giving you the context of the word, justifying the narrative in the painting. I'm not that interested in that. So this is the creative urge of my poem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe we can smoothly kind of go back to Jenny's work, because it's very different. We kind, and Jenny's and Tim as well, because both of them have subtitles. Both of them, right from the beginning, are telling us that this is a piece of work that's based on something else. So before we kind of read the poem itself, so to speak, we have a sense that this is inspired by something else. So could we kind of first talk a little bit about that, because it really affects or shapes our reading experience. So Jenny and Tim, any thoughts?
For me, I just want to honor the artist by putting the artist's name and name of the artwork there, because I did use the image, and I do struggle with how much I could translate from a piece of artwork by describing it. Am I stealing ideas from the artist? Because I do think artists are poets without words in so many ways. So yeah, for me, that's pragmatic. I don't want to plagiarize anyone. Yeah.
Jenny?
Yes, I think, I was thinking that when I wrote this poem, other than just relying on the film or kind of re-experiencing the film as a way of helping to bring out what I wanted to write about. It's also to do with like the playing with eye, because obviously in the movie, like it's Chama One, and in the movie is also talking about the first person, you know, from his perspective, how he sees things. But you know, in the poem, it's the eye is like, is it me, or is it like someone else, or is it just a completely fictional speaker? So I thought that's quite interesting to play with as a writer, and Suli Jen as well being very fictional, like or maybe part of it is not fictional because it's in the movie as well that you can watch. So I just really like the fact that we can contemplate a piece like that.
Right. I think in the case of Collier, it's very different. Obviously, it's not existing artwork or whatever being referred to. And you've mentioned how at least Fleet Arcade may be a kind of memorial. So maybe it's kind of a role of historian that you are playing in a certain sense. And of course, it's not historian in the strictest sense, because there's this personal eye and all of that. So are you consciously trying to play the role of a historian or custodian and kind of think about what we can do to preserve certain overlooked parts of Hong Kong history? Or
what I'm really interested in is what people typically call the archive, like documents, not just photographs, but public documents. And I've done a lot of work like erasure poetry and thinking about other people's texts and how you can make them say other things than they meant to say, especially when they are very powerful and you feel you are not. How can you make them say something else? And so I do have a historical impulse, but I'm very interested in the sorts of history that are not available. As Tim Tim was saying, like we don't teach contemporary Hong Kong history because it's not on the exam, right? This is like those histories that are not on the exam are very interesting to me. And when I find something that feels surprising and much more complex than I mean, everything is more complex than I think it is, right? Like you approach something, you only see one facet of it. But when I learn more about it, something like the Fleet Arcade and what it meant to people, something about like Whitehead and what it might be to be a City U student living on that ground and having no idea. I don't think City U is going to advertise, right? It's not going to be the Whitehead Detention Center dormitory. There seems to me something that needs remediating there. It's a different impulse, I think, with Fleet Arcade. That one I just felt it was very meaningful to me to see other people's responses to it. And I wanted to hold on to that, to document it, I guess, and have to add that to the archive.
And following on that, Dorian, I'll give the chance to you to ask questions. I just want to ask the last one before we move on to that. Because I think for all these works that I'm looking at again and again, I think the role of a creator or artist is quite there, quite explicit. How in all these works we see the role of an artist or writer. Even in Jenny's work, you're talking about that's what I'll write, crumple up and rewrite. So we have this sense of the writer or the artist. It's not just like fictional persona. We kind of immediately kind of associate what we see on the page with the poets themselves. So is it something that you intentionally kind of try to do, or is it how you can also talk about other works of yours, the voice of yours, and the self that of course you are, the connections between them. Do you think about that a lot when you write? Because I think this is something that I can see in these pieces of work. It's not only kind of a viewer of something out there, it's also me as an artist of different kind. Would anyone have anything to say about this? I think Tim Tim, you're taking notes. Could we start with you if you don't mind? Or you need more
This
time?
is when the teacher found out your trick. You're jotting notes to avoid eye contact. And then they catch you.
I'm sorry, we all teachers here, right?
Yeah, I think it's a really big topic, but I do think people label what I write as identity poetry, and some people obviously do not like that, because those people's arguments would be that could undermine the craft of your poetry because this message is louder than your voice. And when I see you telling me your life story, how can I criticize you? That makes the critics look bad. But for me, I think I'm still at the stage where I'm just writing to figure things out. I know writers who are good at constructing things. I can't. I'm just writing my way out of the mess that is happening. And I guess that's how the voice is trying to form itself. And I have this really strange habit of reciting my own poems when I'm nervous at night. I would just recite them to myself again and again. So it's like,
First of all, that means you have very good memory. I can never remember my own poems. Can you guys?
Yeah. I've been trying to remember my own work because I don't know, recently it came to me that what if one day I'm on a desert island, I'm locked up and I don't have any books with me. And what can I do? So I've been trying to remember my own work and other people's work too. So Collier's work are really great. But like those are displayed today, like I can remember those. Nick's work is going to take me a while to remember, but today that was cool because the quoting and throating and holding are creating a great rhythm. Yeah, and I don't know, and I think there is this presumption of identity politics poetry as well. So I've never intentionally watched Wong Kar-wai's movies, and I think, and I think, I don't know. I guess when I write things too, I try to break some presumption a little bit. Like for me, like I don't know, I kind of avoid influences like Wong Kar-wai at this point, but I know I shouldn't be because that's stupid. Because how much can you avoid your formative years? So yeah.
That's all. You can really ask questions to each other as well. This is the time.
Can I quickly respond to your
Of course.
question? From point of view, I think well, my poem is clearly the point of view of the viewer of the painting. So it's a typical point of view adopted when the poet writes about or after an artwork, right? Actresses. How come we never bring up this term today? Because I sent an email to my students saying this term is likely, mentioned by someone.
There's a slide, but there's no time for that. But we will come back to
actresses. Okay. So it is simple and common, but I find writing actresses useful for my creative writing class, which is not obviously offered every semester or year. And when it happens, it's already in Sem 2, which coincides with Art Basel and Art Central. Then I will usually ask students to go to an art exhibition and go see paintings, installations, sound work for 2 hours. Now, it makes you look good, right? It's Instagrammable. And then think about ways to write about the artwork. Then I think this is a very good training for them. I usually ask them to shift the perspective. I mean, depends on what paintings you see. I mean, if you have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with your Dongwon paintings, local painters' work, your Dongwon. It's very everyday life Hong Kong. And of course, you can depict the actions, from the viewers. But if you encounter an abstract painting, like Sai Wong, like that, or Tracy Evans, there's no narrative for you to tell. You have to find a perspective. You can imagine yourself as the red that you see on the painting, or from the frame of the painting. Shift the perspective. This is particularly important in creative writing. It opens up your imagination and mind. But yet we are all reading these poems as poetry readers. The nature of approaching the poem is entirely different. Because as a creative writer, you have to be creative instead of reflective. But as poetry readers, you may want to like get as close as the author's intent as much as possible, if it ever is a truth. Okay, so I think a perspective issue. For me, I think it's more difficult for training students writing skills and write something different, persona.
And we have that in Jenny's poem as well, I think. By the way, Nick, we've just shown kind of the definition of the term is on the right-hand side. Emphasis or phrases, pronounce it the way you like. And in general, these days, critics, researchers, including myself, we see it as a literary description of or commentary on a visual work of art. So it can be a painting, it can be a sculpture, even a film, or something like a digital image. But in the past, the term, actually, the use of that is traceable to ancient Greek days. So Homer, he would like describe this shield of Achilles, all the small details in this, all these concentric circles really beautifully spread over this shield. But these days, we kind of just use the term to talk about just poems and how they use, how they write about art, how they describe them. Anyway, do we have other? Oh, we have lost Jenny and Tim Tim because of showing the slides. Yeah, there we go. Jenny and Collier, would you have anything else to add to this, or we can kind of see what the audience would like to ask us? So yeah, I think. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yeah, Swan.
Hi, this isn't really related to the poem specifically mentioned today. But I noticed that most of the poetry collections here were published in UK presses or generally foreign presses. So I was really wondering, in order to be a Hong Kong poet, is it really necessary to kind of have this connection to the UK or to be kind of involved in the literary world outside of Hong Kong?
I think that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? This is also something, well, should I start, or we should start with those who are based in the UK, or I don't know.
For the ball to go.
Okay, the ball is in your court, Jenny and Tim Tim. Would you have any comment on that? No, that's fine.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Just like, is it basically like, do they need to participate in the literary scene or literary scene in the UK? I don't quite hear the
No,
whole.
sorry, I was just wondering because I remember during our poetry course, like we had to talk with Nine Arches Press. So I was just wondering, with all these kind of UK-based poetry presses and collections, I was just wondering if to be a Hong Kong poet, it's really necessary to have this kind of connection with the UK, and that you're able to traverse yourself in these British literary circles, and to have that kind of means of traveling to the UK, and like citizenship, of course. So I was wondering really if to be like a successful Hong Kong poet or writer generally, if you don't speak Cantonese, that's necessary to have this kind of British connection. That makes sense?
Yeah, well, I guess it's I don't know. I'm sure Tim Tim and the others will talk about it further. But just like from my own personal circumstance, I think it's more like an unplanned, event that I'm here, and I think it's like basically after finishing my studies, I continue to be in the UK, and I thought I always thought that I'm gonna come back to Hong Kong, but it's it's a continuous. Once you decided to stay, you wanted to build something, you wanted to, immerse yourself and learn more about, poetry and art and other things. So, but I think there's nothing that is necessary for an artist to feel inspired or to engage or to write, because the practice is very global nowadays. And I don't really feel that, they have to, also they don't have to speak a certain language whatsoever, and although having multilingual capacity is always a very inspiring thing, I think. And I feel that, like, although being in the UK has influenced my work in certain ways, but it doesn't, I also feel equally, actually even more inspired when I was in Hong Kong, because I recently came back to Hong Kong for a while to visit my family. And I think, like, there's something about, being in the city where I was born that I feel like tremendously energetic and happy, and in a way, even in certain ways anyway. But maybe it's the influence of people, and I think the creativity for me is in the mind, but it's a reaction or interaction with the place or places. So I don't know if I explained myself very well, but I hope that the other speakers can, shed light on this.
I think, well, at least speaking of my own experience, I think it's a personal choice. I think it depends on what kind of audience you want to reach. Because, and there is another dimension to it, because again, we're living in a digital world. It's not just about publishing certain things in the UK, it's kind of publishing it online so that you get the biggest draw or audience. And but speaking of affiliations or connections, is really a personal choice, isn't it? And yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that, I guess.
I would just like to say it's really a question of economics. I mean, you kind of pointed this out when you were talking about resources, but also there are very few publishers of poetry in English in Hong Kong. Singapore, which people often contrast in terms of, like, many things, Hong Kong and Singapore, but they have a very thorough government support of the arts. They have their own interesting problems with that, of course, but it's very difficult, I think, to be a poet writing in English. If you want to reach an audience, you need a publisher, you need someone who's going to take care of your book, who's going to submit it to contests, who's going to market it well, who's going to try and get it into bookstores. And there's not a lot of that in Hong Kong in the English language press. There are a few presses, but the options are pretty limited. So I think many people want to be read, seek international publishers.
Just one last point, in this regard, I guess. This is an anthology, and Swan, you're in it as well, I think. This is called Where Else, an International Hong Kong Poetry Anthology. It features the works of all the poets, sitting in front of you. And it's published by Firth, which is British Poetry Press. Again, it's really about, as Collier, you've said, there's a money side to it as well. Maybe we don't have enough publishers or people indeed who see enough potential or financial draw of our work. So yes, there's the personal choice, and second, there's this market as well. There is this production side or circulation side to this poetry thing, if I have to call it this way. Should we move on to others if they have any other questions? We do have, I think we can have 2 more questions, depending on how long these questions are. Maybe Ernest, or I think you're Ernest, right? Because I know your name. I'm sorry, I know different people's names.
Hi, yes, I'm Ernest. I'm just wondering about next poem. I don't know. but I was wondering where the urge to destroy is also a creative urge, and how by quoting or the multi-layers of quoting is also kind of destroy like when you relay a message, you can destroy the original message. I was thinking there's a sort of like the dynamic of continuing the creation and also the structure of the original meaning, and also with the kind of fragmentary sentence and the very continuous flow of poem and kind of the lack of punctuation. I was wondering, I don't know where this is going to, but I was wondering if you would like to comment on that.
Yes. I'm just very, very quiet because if I don't repeat the quoting, I can't go on when I write. So I'm relying on the rhythm to keep me writing to finish the work. So whatever the repetition makes you feel is actually valid. So I think it's the reader's job. I don't want to impose like, oh, this is punctuation less, and this is exactly what Banksy did in his life or his work. I don't have this intent. Honestly, I don't even care about whether it's Banksy's work or which work. See, it is that I saw. So for me, no, I see it from a creative point of view.
I think we do see a good variety of forms. If we're to use the term, how it's really this discursive, rhythmic kind of form that we have in Nick's work, and then Jenny's work, we have different shapes and different, number of lines, and of course Collier's work is digitally driven, and Tim Tim's there's like 2 sections, and again really fragmentary and all of that. So hopefully you're shown this, infinite opportunities when it gets to writing a poem. Do you want to ask another question? The lady in front of us.
So my question is for Jennifer. We didn't get to hear you talk about your second poem, but they're both about Wong Kar-wai's work, and I can tell from reading them, or at least what I'm sensing, is that you seem to have a really deep connection with his work. But I found it really interesting that you chose, instead of writing a poem from your perspective about how you feel about the movies, you chose to write from the perspective of it from inside the movies almost. Like you chose to write about it from the characters, and that's almost an expression of that's almost an even deeper expression of that connection to those movies. And I guess I was just wondering about your thought process behind that, what made you go for that approach as opposed to writing, from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll try to be brief, but I think often maybe this relates to creative urge as well, which now is in Nicholas' poem and what Antony has mentioned as well. I think for me, being the audience of a film sometimes almost makes me feel like I want to walk into the film and be part of it. And I think maybe that's from the creative urge of, admiring a piece of art and wanting to be part of it. And how to do this is to turn yourself into, one of the characters and explore what they feel. And I think there's this intimacy when you have, when you really admire artwork in that way, you can take part in it. And also because of the unknown, I think art is very subjective, and even when we look at the film, everyone experiences it differently, and I enjoy kind of the fragmentary cinematography of that, of their approach in storytelling, because they don't tell you everything, do they? And there's a lot of the hidden what you call that, the underlying subtext that is not told in the story. And I think that's partly why I enjoy those movies a lot, and that repetition of characters, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, everyone. Would we have any other thoughts for the time being? Any urge to make any other response? If not, I'll just appropriate Tim Tim's some of the lines from Tim Tim's poem. If she doesn't mind, I guess she doesn't. So sometimes we enter a room and forget why we are here. So I hope we had a good time, talking about poetry and Hong Kong and art and all of that. Don, would you show the last slide? Yeah, I think the last, the second last. Would you do it full screen? Yeah, so we have other works that you can look at in if you have time. And the last slide, Don. We also would again express our deepest gratitude to no, I'm sorry. We've lost the guests. So can we maybe share screen and then we can see them at the same time? I don't want them to feel ignored. Yeah, sorry for the hiccup. I think we're doing fine. All right. So once again, thanks so much to Nick, Collier, and Jenny, and Tim Tim. It's been a long day for them. I'm sure they have, other things going on. And I think, Nick, you just finished a class, actually. That's impressive. You're here. And so others, I'm sure you had a long day as well. So thank you so much for being here.